Welcome to the Mookse and Gripes Podcast. Hello, everybody. This is Trevor. Conversely, Paul. Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good. How about you, Trevor? You having a good morning so far?
Yeah, I'm having a really good morning. I've been looking forward to recording with you for a while because sometimes we keep in touch a little bit better between recording sessions. It's not like we weren't talking or keeping in touch, but you had kind of a big work thing that you were working on, and I didn't want to bother you. And I know you were, even when you weren't doing that, you need to be doing things with family. So we haven't talked as much as we might normally between episodes. It's nice to see you again.
I know, you too. I missed you. Yeah, it's like you said, it's been one of those little stretches that we talk about sometimes where life has a way of interfering, and haven't been quite as available recently. Haven't had as much time to do the stuff that I really, enjoy. But luckily, that period's over and I'm back. And
feeling better than ever.
Much better, much better. Yeah, so it's nice to see you.
Well, one of the things that you did, I've kind of jokingly said on this work, thing that you had, was you upgraded podcast co-host. Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about that? You posted on Twitter, so I'm assuming you're okay with people knowing just in general what happened.
No, absolutely. Well, first of all, definitely not. I would never do that. But yeah, so I had a friend who I worked with years ago, and he kind of was telling me, he was another book lover like we are. And he would tell me, he's about 10 years older than me, that, as you go through your work life, you have to find ways to make work, a passion, or at least something that you can be excited about. And so one of the things I get to do with my job is I get to choose keynote speakers for this big conference we have every year. And so, I've been able to meet some pretty cool people over the years, but usually it's like political people or, doctors or stuff like that. And this year I was able to swing it to get Mr. LeVar Burton to join us for our keynote speaker, which was amazing. Like many people maybe on this podcast listening, I grew up watching, Reading Rainbow, and as an early book lover, he was always a huge influence. So yeah, to be able to chat with him a little bit and meet him in person was an absolute dream come true. So yeah, it was really fun. And for anybody who's worried, he is just as charming and kind in real life as he appeared to be on screen, which was a huge relief to me.
And how did he have any questions about the Mookse and Gripes podcast? I mean, how much did you have to LeVar, calm down? We're here to talk about you and your experiences.
Exactly. I had to fend him off, and I'm very happy with Trevor as a co-host. There's no openings at this time. I'm sorry. No. It was really cool. He was just really an interesting guy, and of course the audience loved him. It was really interesting to see. The audience was divided, and he even mentioned, when people come up to him in public, he said 9 times out of 10 he can figure out if they're coming to him as a Roots fan, as a Star Trek fan, or a Reading Rainbow fan. And so at one point we kind of asked the audience, and it was a little light on Roots, but there were some people basically, what do you think of when you think of LeVar Burton? And some people said Roots. Quite a few, of course, said Star Trek, but I'm happy to report that far and away the majority said it was all about Reading Rainbow. So
well, that's interesting. I would have guessed the other, even though I'll admit the Reading Rainbow music plays through my head. Like when you first sent me a little screenshot of you guys chatting over Zoom, that song just went right through my head.
I know.
Didn't really have much to do with Star Trek, even though I watched that, grew up watching that, and certainly would think of that immediately after. But
right, yeah, no, but it was really fun. And so despite all the stress of the last couple of weeks, that was definitely that was definitely a big highlight for me. So,
well, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, in some other preliminaries, we released a newsletter, our first newsletter, a couple of weeks ago when we released our, last episode on our dustiest books. And that was kind of a test because I never have really thought, we need to get a newsletter. We need to do all these things that everybody does. But the reason that I started one was as an easier way for us to get show notes to everybody. It comes to your email, and it has some of our other thoughts. We can put links to the videos or links to Twitter posts, or we can put feedback in there. We can put polls and links to things like that in the same spot. And the other thing that I thought was really cool is you listeners can comment on those posts, like them, do whatever you want to on those. It's kind of like a little blog that comes right to your inbox. I don't know all the ways that it works. It's a Substack one. It's a free one. I know Substack, sometimes when I hear that, I think, oh, that's the one you pay for.
Mm-hmm.
But you can set up ones that are free, and that's what we've done. And so I thought that might be an easier way for people to get an idea of just various things that we're thinking of, and announcements about shows that are upcoming, but also the show notes will be there.
Yeah.
As
No,
a
I
nice
really
little
appreciate you
bonus.
doing that. It's peeking around in it. It looks great. And I think, like you said, we can only continue to experiment and have fun and grow it and maybe get feedback and all kinds of stuff. So that's another exciting way that we can connect with people.
And I do appreciate everybody who signed up. We got quite a few signups right at, in the first 24 hours. And so, that was kind of fun. But yeah, please, reach out on there if you want to. It's not obligatory. But I thought that was really neat. You don't have to go and follow us on Twitter or DM. Here's the thing that's hard about Twitter. I love Twitter. And I hope you do follow us on Twitter and that we follow you and we can, kind of chat back and forth. But if you and I are chatting on Twitter and someone doesn't see it, they never, how do you find that?
Yeah.
But if we're talking back and forth on some of these posts, these Substack posts that come right to your email, whenever you want to, you can go back and find that or see what people are saying. I don't necessarily expect this to be a game changer and, change the way that we do things or maybe be the most, engaging part of it all. I think we get quite a bit on Instagram and on Twitter, but it is an option out there and we'll be paying attention. So if you haven't signed up yet, we'll have links to it in the show notes in the newsletter.
All right.
If you haven't signed up yet, let me know and I'll try and figure out a way to help you get to that. But we'll put a little thing, maybe even in the description of the podcast.
That's a good idea.
So that on your podcast app, wherever you're listening to this, it should be in the description. You can just go and click on that and that'll open it all up for you. So
yeah, looking forward
that should be a fun one. And speaking of our last episode on Dusty Books, we had some fun conversations and some fun feedback on that. I don't know if you remember or saw as many of these. Again, you were quite busy, but for example, I really liked the perspective that Rowan Mateson sent on. I think it was on my Instagram. We're talking about Dusty Books, and do you feel any guilt for it? And she goes, I just like to think of them as ripening there. Which I like that. They're ripening for the right time.
Exactly. That's a great way to look at it.
And Wendy Whidden posted I heard a friend defend the number of unread books he's had by saying, if I'd read them all, it would be a collection. But this is my library. And I love that.
I do too.
I mean, I do have a collection, and I think that's a fine way to look at it as well. But yeah. There's no need to feel guilt, folks.
No, I really like that actually, because it's not, I mean, it can be, but it's not necessarily like it's a trophy case of things you've accomplished. There's some that you've read and loved and other ones that are just sitting there waiting for you. That's a really good way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. And it was fun too to hear others who were saying, oh, this is how long it's been since I've owned this book. I think someone put that they owned War and Peace since 1977. And John Self said something like, was it even set that far back in the past? So I enjoyed it. Any that come to mind to you, or any thoughts on the Dustiest Books podcast as you've, as it's been out now for a week or two?
Yeah, nothing specific. I was going to mention that one that interaction you just mentioned with John Self. I thought that was hilarious. and it was just interesting. There were so many people I saw a lot that they said they'd had at least since the early 2000s. And then there were a few that crept into the 90s. But I think, yeah, what was that, 1978? That might be the winner so far. But if anybody has one that they've been holding on to longer, I'd love to hear about it. But it's funny, I have some that my grandpa, he was an English professor or an English high school teacher, excuse me. And he has passed along some books to me that are very, very old too. So it's always interesting when they were on his shelf forever and now they're on my shelf forever. It's fun.
That is cool. All right. Well, everybody's always welcome again to send us feedback, send us your thoughts on episodes. I just love hearing it. So thanks so much for that.
I do too. And I think most people know this, but even if you're listening to an episode that's from 6 months back or longer, we still love to hear feedback. You don't need to ever worry that it needs to be one of the more recent ones. I love hearing, just remembering some of the other episodes we've had and hearing feedback on those as well.
Well, we have a few new Patreon supporters that I want to thank publicly on here. And one or two of these I may have already mentioned on a past episode, but because I wasn't sure, I don't want to miss you. Debbie Baker signed up for the $5 a month. Thank you so much, Debbie. It really does help. It really does. This is, we do put out money for the show, just for the hosting and the various services that we subscribe to get it out there. And we're going to do that anyway, but it's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is. And it'll, we plan on using the money to come back into the show in every way, getting books for giveaways, things like that. And, someday Paul and I totally expect to be able to retire and do this for a living. So every dollar helps.
That's right. Just a couple more Patreons away. That's all we are.
Bill Martini signed up at $10 a month. Thanks, Bill. And I don't think it was just because he won the Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont giveaway, because he had signed up. I didn't really make the connection, but he had signed up prior to that.
Oh,
that may have been karma. It wasn't us. We weren't oh, we got to get him a book now, because we send a book at that level anyway. So one way or another, Bill was getting some books from us, and that was a good way to kind of make his entrance and come in,
thank you, Bill,
and get a win. Sigrun Hodney, she's a great painter and reader, and she signed up for 30 NOK. I looked it up. This is just a foreign currency, and I can't remember. I apologize. I should have made sure that I looked, but I think it's the Norwegian currency. And I looked up to kind of what that meant, and that I don't remember either. But thank you so much, Sigrun. We've been in touch a little bit on Patreon, because we can also chat back and forth, and it's been just delightful with all of you. Christine Boatman signed up at $5 a month. And Karen O signed up at $1 a month a week ago, both of those. So again, thanks so much. Every little bit is just heartening. It's fun. But when we have these, I do want to thank Patreon supporters, but I don't want anybody to feel like that's a requirement or something we expect or anticipate. We just love doing this and love engaging with you. And yes, this means a lot and is helpful, but we know that everybody's earning good, hard money and have things to do with it. And, if you have the ability and the wish to support us that way, we appreciate it. But if you can't or don't, that's also fine. We love engaging with you in any way possible.
No, like we always say, and I know we repeat ourselves, but it's absolutely true. I mean, getting a note, comment from somebody, a like, a retweet, all that stuff means a lot. So whatever way you support us, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's true. Now, because we do want to give back a little bit to the Patreon community, we actually released a bonus episode last week, which was kind of a chatty catch-up. And I know Dorian said that it's nice to have more Trevor and Paul. I'm not sure if everybody feels that way, but thank you, Dorian. and that's kind of what it is. We're going to try to mix those up. We're going to, our goal is to do one of those a month. And at any level that you are a Patreon supporter, you're going to get those. There's no you have to subscribe for this much a month in order to get that bonus episode. It's just, that $1 a month gets you all of that. You also get our episodes a little bit early. They come out on Tuesdays on Patreon, whereas they come out Thursdays everywhere else. That's a big deal, just get it sooner.
You could be a trendsetter. You can be talking about stuff before anybody else even knows.
but when it comes to the bonus episodes, we're not planning on having that be a substitute or, using up ideas, things that we're working on for the regular show. So don't feel deprived or like we're trying to make this a paid thing. We just really want to give back to the Patreon community in some different ways, to show our thanks, but in no way to take away from what we'd be doing here regularly. So Any other thoughts on any of that, Paul?
I don't think so. Just again, thanks to everybody. It's so exciting. I never even dreamed that we would have so many people, weighing in and enjoying this. It's been so much fun, and I look forward to continuing to do it. It's great.
All right. And today we have a kind of a two-parter episode. We are going to start by talking about summer reading, some of our own 2022 summer reading plans or, thoughts on what's coming up. We're also, this is a little bit scary, but should be fun, going to introduce the Mookse and the Gripes Summer Book Club. Yeah. We'll do that here in a few minutes. And then at the end of the episode, we're going to follow up on our most recent assigned reading from our Short Books of Fiction episode and chat for a little bit about Aphasia by Mauro, Javier, Cárdenas, and also about Ennemonde by Giono. Those are the two books that we'll be talking about at the end of the episode. But we're going to start with summer reading. And I feel like there should be some nice, breezy summer music playing in the background right now to introduce this segment. I'll do some work to see if I can get that in there.
I like it.
But yes, it is Memorial Day weekend for Paul and me. It's Saturday, May 28th. Memorial Day's on Monday. And my kid's last day of school was yesterday. I don't know if that's the same where you're at, Paul, or if they have a little bit longer.
No, they finished up just a couple days ago, actually. So yeah, they're on summer break. It's time.
So it's not quite officially summer by the calendar, but it is summertime for summer break. Summer reading is coming up. In fact, I signed the kids up for the Book It, my youngest, to the Book It summer reading program. I didn't even know they did that still. Oh, cool. But did you ever do the Book It as a kid?
I don't.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've heard about it, yeah, but I don't think I ever did it.
It's the Pizza Hut reading thing.
Actually, I did. I didn't know that's what it's called. I did do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, man. As a kid, I loved going and getting my personal pan pizza. Mm-hmm. It's still like right now. I'm like, that's exactly what I want today.
I know.
Even though it does not taste the same as when I was a kid.
Right. Right. Yeah, your taste may have changed a little over the years, but it tastes like nostalgia.
Yes, it tastes like reading. It tastes like the little pins that you'd get, the Book It pins. Yes. So I signed up the two youngest for that, and they start on June 1st to be able to, record their reading so they can eventually get their personal pan pizza. And I feel like they should be paying us right now, the Pizza Hut, but I doubt they're gonna, but anyway. So summer reading, what comes to mind when the words summer reading are uttered, Paul? What do you think of?
I definitely do go back to childhood first, and that program, or often the libraries will have, like a summer reading program for kids to sign up for, where if you read a certain number of books over the course of the summer, you get some prizes or some acknowledgement. And that's definitely one thing I go to. Personally, I don't necessarily feel myself drawn to a particular type of book in the summer. I was trying to think if there was did my reading taste change at all? And for me, I don't think that's the case. I'm not a big beach book guy or a blockbuster movie kind of guy. For the summer, I don't focus on that type of thing. But I really have some strong summer reading memories that I thought I might share. So when my wife and I were first dating and first married, we'd go every summer to some cabins that are up in the Colorado mountains, and we'd stay for, maybe like a long weekend or maybe a week at the most. And they weren't super rustic, but they were fairly rustic. There wasn't obviously TV or anything like that. And so it was just this nice time to kind of unplug and just be up there. And I remember sitting out on the porch in front and looking out at the lake in front of me and reading, for example, Lonesome Dove, which, as we've mentioned before, is one of my...
It's been a while since you've mentioned it.
I know.
I'm glad it came up.
I thought everybody was probably missing me talking about it.
I thought about it like a week or two ago. I thought, Paul hasn't brought up Lonesome Dove for a little while. What? And I did. That was not me trying to mock. I genuinely was like, huh.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that was where I read it, and it was such a wonderful experience just having that time, where it was before kids, and we were, like I said, unplugged and just being up there, and you could just immerse yourself in that world. And then I also remember, it was a while ago, so we've talked about Robert Jordan and his giant fantasy novels. I remember reading one of those at those cabins as well. And one other one that I remember reading there's a nonfiction book called Undaunted Courage by Stephen Ambrose, which is a really fascinating look at the Lewis and Clark expedition. And I remember some very strong memories associated with that time there too. And then one other thing that just comes to mind a lot for me is during the summer, these are more recent. My brother and a friend of ours and I will go every summer on a backpacking trip up into the mountains. And usually it's like 3 nights and pretty good hike back in there. And despite the fact that you're trying to cut weight and you're like debating, do I really need like 3 pairs of socks? Maybe I could get away with 2, but somehow I still manage to usually squeeze in like 3 or 4 books, which is really smart, but, so anyway, yeah, I've had some great memories of taking books up there, and often, like when you're camping and all of a sudden you see the clouds starting to get dark and you hear the thunder rolling in and it's like, oh no, we better head for the tent. And, I've had some great memories of just being stuck in the tent while it's raining and just sitting there in the sleeping bag, reading all these books and stuff. So that's been a really good one. And a couple that stand out to me that I've read in that kind of a setting is A River Runs Through It, which is one of my favorite books. And then there's a book called Fire Season by Philip Larson that's about this reporter who would spend entire summers up in a fire tower in New Mexico, and his job was just to spot and look out for the smoke. So anyway, those are just some, I associate not only the content of them with summer, but also some of the memories of reading them with summer. So yeah, lots of great memories. How about you? What do you think about when you go to summer reading?
Well, so I do think of the library. We also have our kids all signed up for the library reading, what would I call it? The reading program.
Mm-hmm.
They get little prizes, but they like win or earn tickets to enter into giveaways for various kind of cool things. Usually it's my wife who wins because we can both sign up for it too. She always wins something. It feels like I never do. But beyond that, you can also, every time you get a certain amount, you can do a spin on a wheel that gives you like a free pair of silly socks or candy or, who knows what, the prize on the wheel, something from the local business, a free cinnamon roll or something like that. And I love doing that with them. They do that throughout the year though. So I don't always think about that as summer. But definitely, I'm already like, kids, what books do you want to read this summer? What should we do? I'll buy you not just a personal pan pizza. We'll buy you a pizza.
That's right.
If you get some of this stuff done. I think it backfires a little bit more on me than it should, but at any rate, and I do think of nonfiction for whatever reason in the summertime. My brain starts to shift to more nonfiction. For example, I've been reading the Candace Millard book, The River of the Gods, the one about the Nile, that just came out. And I don't know why. I'm not always in the mood for nonfiction like that, but for whatever reason, when June comes around, I kind of am. And a lot of times it's American history, but it's not exclusive to that. I think there's something about and it could go all the way back to watching Ken Burns' Civil War, which is such, to me, a summary thing, even though the Civil War took place, other times of year. So many of those battles were, in the heat of summer and, July. And I watched it, in the summertime. And so my mind often wants to watch or read nonfiction books. And so that's one thing that definitely comes to mind. But I think of school reading lists, so it's always like, well, what classic should I be reading? What book have I missed? The Catcher in the Rye or The Great Gatsby or The Age of Innocence, books I've read now, but a lot of those I didn't get assigned for school. I read them because they were on these lists. Slaughterhouse-Five. I remember one summer just getting one of those lists and just working my way through it over the course of the summertime, because we didn't read those in school. And so that's something I think about. And I'm with you. I don't necessarily change a lot of the things that I read. Like I don't have a beach or a vacation book per se. But we are going on holiday, and I bought, is it Jade City? It's a fantasy trilogy by Fonda Lee is who it is, an Asian kind of set fantasy. I don't know much about it other than people are like, it's kind of like The Godfather too, and I'm thinking, well, it's getting good reviews. I think it was a finalist for, something like the Hugo or the Nebula, or one of those. And I thought, oh, I'll give that a go on the vacation. So I do sometimes look at that, but I may have done that in November as well, had it just struck me in the mood. But but I'll often try and, figure out what books. That's one of the funnest parts of a vacation is what books am I going to take this year?
I know. I was going to ask, between you and your wife and your kids, how many books total would you say will be going along with you on this vacation?
Oh, I usually take the most. My
Yeah.
wife usually takes a couple,
Mm-hmm.
because, and she's so much more dedicated when she starts a book to finishing it before she starts another one, than I am. I like to sit there with it on I don't know. It's maybe not the best way, but sometimes I'm like, I just like to have them on the bedstand.
Yeah.
I know I'm not going to read all of those, but I can pick at them. I can look at the first few pages of a few of these that I'm excited by, and eventually I'll settle on one and read it over the course of the vacation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I usually take 4 or 5. Because we're flying this time, I probably won't take quite as many because I don't want to pack around all of them, but that might just be in my mind right now. We leave in a few days. I haven't packed yet. They'll probably find a few more will probably find their way in there.
I was going to say, you need to get your priorities straight. If you're going to lose something, it can't be the books, like, oh, do I really need deodorant? Nah.
Right. Well, and they have deodorant where we're going, and if they don't, there's the sea, right? I'll be okay. But yeah, the kids actually usually just want their screens, something like that. But so
right,
they'll probably start their reading when they get back, and I'll take a few books that I've been reading to them, even though I know most of the time they'll be playing and doing things with cousins, and never wanting to say, "Oh, Dad, we're ready for you to read to us." But
it's always good to have it on hand.
Maybe, yeah. There's that time it will happen, and if I don't have it, I will be upset.
That's right, exactly.
But the other thing that I was kind of thinking of as we were talking about summer reading is, I do like this time of year, but sometimes it can feel so hot and a little bit miserable that I get really passive. I'm more like want to just sit down in a basement and watch a show or something than read. But I do love a good book that evokes the summer and evokes the season. That makes me enjoy the season better. And so I was trying to think of some great books that I've read that take place in the summer and kind of evoke that heat. And I thought of a few. There's Ray Bradbury's Dandelion Wine. Have you read that one?
No, but it's funny. That one has come up for years as a great summer book. And I've heard so many people say that, and I keep meaning to read it. Maybe this will be the summer where I'll finally do that.
It's kind of a series of short stories, but they take place in the same community, I think. I was surprised. I didn't know they were a series of short stories. So when I'm reading them and I'm 4 or 5 in, I'm thinking, how is all this going to tie together? And what is this kind of weird sci-fi story have to do with these other summery, stories? But it is a lovely look at a kind of a summer vacation, a moment in time, because, we think of summer vacation as this thing, but every one of them that you've had is in the past now. It's gone. That summer is done. And there aren't as many in the future for us as there were in the, well, maybe there's as many but as there were last year, they come and go, and those time periods come and go. Summer vacation as a kid, those are done for us. That's not happening again. And so to be able to evoke some of these things is really just a wonderful way to relive it and re-experience some things and form a lot of those memories again. And I think Dandelion Wine does such a great job with that. Yeah. It's been a long time since I read it, but I loved Dandelion Wine. I thought of The Great Gatsby because, again, one of my earliest reading memories is reading about that scene early on in the book where it's so hot and you walk in and it looks like the women in the room are lying on clouds and drapes are blowing. Man, that's a vivid memory, just sitting down and reading that part of The Great Gatsby and how the heat and the, all of that. There was a book that came out a few years ago called We Were Liars by E. Lockhart that takes place in kind of a summer time that I really enjoyed. It's more like a teen summer vacation, but with, kind of a more sinister aspect to it. And then there's Atonement. Not because the whole thing takes place in the summer by Ian McEwan, but because of the summer scene and that food that just does not belong on a table in the summertime, and that sense there. So those were some of the summer books, not necessarily summer books, but books that I felt like evoke that sense,
Yeah.
that actually make me go, oh, I can enjoy these experiences even when they're somewhat unpleasant in the summer because of the heat and because of all that.
Right.
You can still evoke it in a way that makes you kind of grateful for the memories and grateful for the things to come as you're living through it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was trying to think of a few myself that kind of had that same effect, and definitely came up with a couple. This one's a little on the nose, but we would be remiss if we didn't mention the Summer Book by Tove Jansson. I mean, that one definitely has a lot of
I
that
love
feeling
that
to
book.
it.
I
Hmm.
love that book. Yeah.
And a theme I was noticing between some of these is often it does follow children. These books that came to mind for me over the course of a break, especially a summer break, where they're in a different place. And so it has that kind of feeling like when you're on vacation or going to stay with relatives when you're a kid over
Mm-hmm.
summer, where it's like this displacement, and then it starts to become these daily habits that take up
Yeah.
your entire day. And for that period of 1 week or 1 month or whatever, however long it is, that's your life. But it's this fleeting little time still. And it's such a fascinating feeling when, for the next week, this will be what I will be doing every day. And this is my entire life, but it may never happen again.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that, the summer book has some of that. The Mountain Lion, which I bring up all the time by Gene Stafford. I mean, that's the same thing. It's these two kids who are going to the Colorado mountains during a break, and it has a lot of that feeling of this is a temporary time in their lives, but at the time it's so immersive and everything. One that I was thinking about, you mentioned the library. So Stephen King's It. I know that book
Oh,
is
yeah.
huge and it takes place in so many
Mm-hmm.
different seasons, but one of my very strongest memories of reading, period, is there's a scene where the kids all get out of school for the summer and they're all running outside and throwing their papers in the air and screaming and everything, and everybody starts to disperse. And the kid named Ben immediately heads straight for the library. And it talks about, I don't remember exactly all the details, but my memory of it is he walks out of the blazing sun and he walks into the coolness and the peace of the library,
Mm-hmm.
and he finds his happy place. And if I'm not mistaken, he even signs up for the summer reading thing right away. And he just sits there and, and starts to do that. And that's such a strong reading memory for me. And so much of that book too, there's so many, scenes with the kids goofing around down in the barrens, and
Mm-hmm.
throwing rocks at each other and riding their bikes and everything. And obviously there's lots of not good scenes as far as
It's not
summer.
all happy.
No, it's not. But I don't know if it was the time I read it or whatever, but some of those scenes, even though much of the content is horrific, there's still some peacefulness and some really, nostalgic scenes in that book. So that was another one that came to mind for me.
Well, and I read that one in the summertime too.
Yeah, I
I
did
was
too. That
when I was young. I remember
Mhm.
starting it outside on our porch or our deck, as a kid, and reading the initial few chapters with the paper boat, and just over the course of that summer,
Yeah.
and looking at the dates, because he often has newspaper articles or just the dates of when you're with the kids versus the adults.
Mhm.
And a lot of those kids chapters are, in my mind, I haven't read it in years and haven't looked, but seem like they're, June 15th and,
Yeah.
June 20th. And it's a very summery kind of book in a strange way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one I was thinking about was L.P. Hartley's The Go-Between,
Which I haven't
which
read yet.
you haven't? Okay. Well,
Mm-mm.
that one is very much kind of tying into some of the themes. Oh, go ahead.
Well, as you can say, I got it for Christmas this last year.
Maybe that would be a good one for you to consider for this summer, because it's very much a lot of the themes that we're talking about with a child who goes somewhere else for a period of time. And it has a lot of summer scenery, but also just that feeling of, like I was talking about, being somewhere else where you're not necessarily from, trying to find your new role in this temporary place where you are. And that book is amazing and definitely a summer book. So that might be
All
a good
right.
one to consider.
Well, since we just finished some assigned reading, and I have other things on the docket, but I may toss that one in.
Yeah, I don't know.
You're packing my bags for me
Sorry.
here, Paul.
Did I mention War and Peace?
It's
That's
great.
a great book. War and Peace is a
No.
great book for traveling.
No, that one is retired from my bucket list. I mentioned that in episode 1.
Mm-hmm. I know.
I think summer is an interesting thing because it is an idle. It's a break for as a kid,
Yeah.
but it's like a bunch of them all at once. It's a break in school.
Mm-hmm.
It's oftentimes it's your childhood, so there's kind of that sense of an idol. A lot of the days are kind of have more space within them, and a lot of times you go on holidays, and so you have those little idols. It's like a big, kind of conglomeration of the makings of what will be nostalgia later on, but experiencing those things, it's so interesting. And Stephen Millhauser has an interesting story about a kid who's on a vacation, kind of going through, I don't remember if he's tubing down a river or a ditch or something like that, and just having this horrific sense that this is almost over. And of course that cascades into just general existence.
Mm-hmm.
This time, it was just yesterday that we were getting here, and now it's, this much closer to the end. It's a wonderful story. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it was in the New Yorker maybe a decade ago. I'll figure it out while you talk for just a second, because I can look this up if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. That sounds great. It's funny. I try not to do this too much, but my kids, as they're going through their summer vacation and they're having those moments where like they're bored or just lolling around and complaining, I'm just like, you do realize that this is one of those times in your life. It's not going to last forever, where, most adults who are going to work and all that stuff, they would love to have that time to be bored. And I try not to lay it on too thick, but it's funny how sometimes as a kid, you get these periods and you just don't quite understand how special they are, which I think is part of that's what we all did. And that's kind of what creates that nostalgia. Is at the time, you don't realize that it's going to be this temporary fleeting time. But as you look back on it, you're like, oh man, I'm so jealous of my kids.
I know. Even just yesterday, the kids are out of school yesterday, and one of them comes up in the, at like 4, I'm bored. And I'm like, what? How is that even possible?
Yeah. Like,
So
here, you can do my work. I'm going to go lay by the pool.
Right. I can be bored for a while. That'd be
Exactly.
So the Stephen Millhauser story is called Getting Closer, and it was published in the January 3rd, 2011 issue of the New Yorker, but it takes place in on like a little bit of a vacation. And he's 9 going on 10, skinny tall, shoulder blades pushing out like things inside a paper bag. New blue bathing suit, too tight here, too loose there. But what's all this got to do with anything? And it's just, he's going down this river. Yeah. If he goes into the river, he'll lose the excitement, the feeling that everything that matters, because he's getting closer and closer to the moment he's been waiting for. When you have that feeling, everything is full of life, every leaf, every pebble. But when you begin, you're using things up. The day starts slipping away behind you. He wants to stay on this side of things, to hold it right here. A nervousness comes over him, a chilliness in the sun. In a moment, the day will begin to end. Things will rush away behind him. The day he's been waiting for is practically over. He sees it now. He sees it. Ending is everywhere. It's right there in the beginning. They don't tell you about it. It's hidden away in things. Under the shining skin of the world, everything's dead and gone. Wow. Sorry to bring that into our summer episode, but folks, it's the beginning of summer. Enjoy it now, because it's already over.
No, but it brings up that interesting thing about summer. I think we talked about it in one of our earliest episodes, where there's all this profusion of life and green and newness. But there was a poem that you talked about where there is that edge to it, where to some degree it's almost like this overabundance or this bordering on decay too. So it is interesting. That's why some of these seasonal episodes are so interesting, because your initial thoughts of what a season means aren't the only thing. There's complications there that I really find fascinating.
No, I think it's fun too. And the thing that's nice is we may be regretful of a time that's passing, an idol that's passing, but we love the fall, and we have our holiday time, and then spring is so beautiful. And, so it is something that can also bring a lot of, maybe comfort, and if we have the right perspective on things. So
absolutely. No, that's great.
Well, do you have any summer reading plans this year? I wouldn't necessarily talk too much about how deep we would go into this, but is there something that's on your reading docket that you're like, I'm going to read that this summer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any specific projects, I wouldn't say, but there's a lot of books, given this busy time that I just mentioned, that have been kind of sitting there waiting for me, and they're calling my name. So now, as you mentioned, we have this 3-day weekend coming up to kind of kick off some time where I don't really have.
No, it's already over, Paul.
Oh, no. Well, as we record. No, but yeah. So Gerald Murnane has been buzzing all over the internet lately, and I was able to track down. His books are kind of hard to find sometimes in the US, and I think maybe elsewhere. which maybe given this recent push, they'll become more readily available. But I was able to track down a couple of them from the library that I'm going to dig into here, I hope, this weekend. And then, as those of you who follow me on Twitter may have seen, as I was headed to the airport for my work trip, I had a moment, and there's a tattered cover in DIA, the Denver International Airport. And I just happened to make my way over to the bookstore and picked up a couple of books that I had mentioned earlier that I was really looking forward to, which is Trust by Hernan Diaz and Paradise by Fernanda Melchor. So I grabbed both of those this past week, and both of those I think are going to be within the next month, if not sooner. So those are a few that I'm definitely eyeing at the early part of summer. And then as we get towards the end of the summer, I would like to kind of launch into, my Brothers Karamazov, at least getting it down off the shelf and getting it prepared. I don't know if I'll read it late in the summer or maybe heading into fall, but I'm definitely eyeing it. It's time. We're coming up on halfway through the year, so I want to make sure that doesn't slip through. I absolutely want to make that a priority. The only other thing I'll mention is I think it was one of our friends on Twitter, and I don't remember who, but somebody mentioned taking 1 month to read only Archipelago books.
Yeah,
And
I saw that.
yeah, that
I thought that was a lovely idea.
I love that idea. So I don't know that for sure that I'll do that, but the idea of finding a publisher, and maybe it will be Archipelago, and just kind of doing a deep dive, that sounds really appealing over the summer too. So I'll report back if I end up doing that. But I really love that idea of just, nothing prescriptive or formal, but just picking a publisher you love and just diving in. That sounds really appealing to me.
Yeah, I liked that idea. And Archipelago is such a great one to do that with. Those books are it's so easy to fall inside of those because of their shape and their scent and their texture. Just the physical book, it's a delight to carry it around and read it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's a good idea.
How about you? What about any summer plans for you?
Well, so I talked about the Jade City as the one, that fantasy book. There's a book called The Go-Between by
I haven't heard of that.
I did just throw that on my list,
Nice.
just to make sure it's there. And then I do have Trust by Hernan Diaz as well, that I think sounds great. I actually checked out the audio from the library just to kind of get a feel for it, and listened to the first chapter and thought, well, I want to read this one. But I enjoyed it, but I know I'll get more when I'm reading it and not trying to listen to it while I'm doing other things and, or driving or something like that. But that I really liked what I heard. And then I also have the Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel that I'm looking forward to reading. I bought it and The Glass Hotel because I hadn't read The Glass Hotel yet, and I thought, I need to keep up on her. I'll read it first. And I'm really enjoying The Glass Hotel. That's what I'm reading probably this weekend. I'm trying to finish it this weekend before we leave, and then have the Sea of Tranquility to follow that up. And I don't know what it is about her. If I talk about the stories themselves, I mean, Station 11's easy to kind of give someone a little bit of a hook, but The Glass Hotel, it could sound so stupid and kind of banal or uninteresting, but she just has a way. There's something in the tone. There's a softness, strangely, even in Station 11 where horrific things are happening. I don't know what it is. There's a sensitivity to fragility or something like that makes her tone just very, it's not light. That's not it at all. But it's delicate, sensitive, and I don't know what it is. Even when I'm not like totally invested in maybe one of the scenes or one of the characters, I'm very invested in the way that she writes it. And I'm feeling the same way a lot with The Glass Hotel. There's, some characters where I'm like, I don't necessarily care to read more about them because I'm interested in where their story goes. And that can sound like, I don't care. But I realize what keeps me going is just the way that she's going to portray them and kind of talk about some of their own insecurities and vulnerabilities. And it's got a sadness to it that I find very, very interesting. And I don't know much about Sea of Tranquility. I've kind of kept my eyes off of reviews and such. Not necessarily deliberately. It's just the way it's worked, but I'm excited about that one too.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts. As we've talked about with her, I didn't love Station 11, but it's kind of like an earworm where you still find yourself thinking about it. And
yeah,
there's something very special about her, where I've talked to you and several other people about her books and varying degrees of passion for the books themselves. But no matter what you end up thinking of her books, she's not somebody that anybody just dismisses. And there's something about her, like you said, that just keeps working through your brain. So yeah, I'd love to hear what you think of those as you make your way through them.
Yeah, I'll report back for sure, and let you know whether I think, oh, you should check one of these out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we do have one other book on our shelf that we don't know what it is yet for our summer reading plans.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we decided to do a Mookse and Gripes podcast summer book club. One book selected by our listeners from a list. We're going to do a poll. And if you're listening to this, the poll is out because I'm going to make it go live the day that this podcast comes out. It's on Twitter because I have no idea where else to do a poll that people can just find and go to. Mm-hmm. But we will link to it in our show notes. We will link to it in the Substack newsletter. And you can go there. I'm going to pin it to the top of my feed at Mookse, Mookse, on Twitter. And you can help us pick which of these 4 books is going to be another one of our summer reads. And we would love it if you read along with us. Pick a book that you want to read. Mm-hmm. We've picked 4 that we want to read. So we're good with whatever ends up winning. Both of us are. We made that deliberate. Neither of us said, I just want to put this one on here. I don't care if you don't want to read it. Suck it up. We really tried to find 4 books that we would be delighted if any of them won, and disappointed if it didn't.
Right.
So we're going to be disappointed by 3 of these that lose, but very happy with the one that wins. And we want you to vote. And like I say, read along. Probably the best place to follow along and share your thoughts will be the newsletter, but certainly also on Twitter, maybe to an extent on Instagram as well. But you can also email us and DM us your thoughts, whatever you need. But we're going to let you know what book it is. We'll publish it even before the podcast, but on our next episode, in 2 weeks, we'll know what it is. And by that time, we'll have a plan for time when we're going to start it. It'll likely be, not right away. Of course, you can read it whenever you want to. But we'll set a time that we're going to start it. We're going to read it. We'll discuss it. And then we'll get back on here and talk about it here, toward the, July or August. I don't know. We'll see what book it is. We'll make the plan. But for now, please go over and vote for one of the following. This is Renata Adler's Speedboat, Jorge Luis Borges' Ficciones. You can get it as complete fiction, but this is the particular book in there, Ficciones. William Trevor's The Children of Dynmouth, and Willa Cather's A Lost Lady. Those sound right, Paul? Did I get that right?
Sounds right. Everyone you mentioned, I was thinking, I hope that one wins, and then you mentioned the next one. So yeah, no, seriously, they all sound wonderful. Can't wait to see what people think.
And I think for both of us, books we've never read. We also did that. We picked books that we have not read yet. Twitter allows for polls to be open for 7 days, and I figure why not? Yeah. Make sure people who only get to listen to this, a few days after it comes out or over the next week. So it's going to start the day this episode goes live for everybody. And that is June 2nd, Thursday, June 2nd. So Patreon listeners, I know that it's still May for you, May 31st, when you can get this and access it. But the Twitter poll will go up on June 2nd and be open for a week. And then we'll come back right after that to record our next episode and let you know what won. So exciting stuff.
Looking forward to it.
All right. So again, go vote. We'll be back in a second with our wrap up of our assigned reading. All right, listeners. A few weeks ago, a month ago now almost.
Mm.
We did an episode on short books fiction, and at the end of that we each picked a book to read that was short. Some shorts are shorter than others, it turns out. I'm excited to talk to you about that, Paul. But with no bitterness, just a little bit of a chuckle. And you may remember, Paul chose Aphasia by Mauro Javier Cárdenas, and I chose Ennemonde by Giono, translated by Bill Johnston. And let's start with Aphasia. I don't know if anybody joined us on this. We didn't really follow up, so if there may be several of you who did not go and get these and may be waiting to see if we liked them or not, and maybe that'll be a deciding factor. So I don't intend to spoil these.
No.
I don't think we could spoil these. These are not spoiler kinds of books. The plots of both of these are just, I don't even know. I don't, know.
Even if I wanted to spoil these, I don't know how I would.
Yes, that's how I was feeling. I'm like, spoiling them in some ways might be doing you a favor.
Yeah, because somebody did spoil them for me.
Yes, a little bit enigmatic, a little bit hard to wrap our heads around, but in a really nice way. And Paul, I think you were a little bit nervous about Aphasia. Do you want to kind of, every time I touched base with you, we were like, let's not talk about how we feel about him. But I could sense you were a little bit maybe feeling worried that you had assigned me a book that I was hating, which is not the case.
But hating necessarily, but it was more when you and I started this podcast, we had kind of always said, like, we want to make sure that it doesn't ever feel, like work.
Yeah.
Or, we always wanted to make sure that if we were going to assign each other a book, or if we were going to choose to read a book, that it was something that we would both enjoy. And so, everything I read about this one ticked all the boxes for so many things that I think, are things that we look for in a book. And so when I started reading it, I was loving the first, passages, and I was like, oh, this is great. This is great. And then you and I think we haven't talked much about these, but we both mentioned there are some sections of this where it is a little bit of slow going. And as you make your way through it, you start to realize it pays off, of course. But yeah, no, I think the only reason that I was a little hesitant was just, this is supposed to be short books, which you think of as like something you can sit down and read in like a sitting or two. And this is absolutely not the case with Aphasia, but hopefully in the long run, it sounds like it paid off for you, and it definitely did for me too. Yeah,
I really liked this book.
Yeah,
I may have even been a little unsure, 50 pages in. And so listeners know, I mean, it's not like a Bernhard book where it's, you start the first word and you're not going to have a break until the last word.
No.
There are chapters and breaks, and some of them are longer than others, but it is a big block of text, usually without any kind of real sense of where you can take a breath from beginning to end. You're like, okay, the next chapter starts in 5 pages. Just dive in,
right,
and read along. It's a lot of stream of consciousness in a way. And I don't want to. That's so. That term means something, but it also is like a catch for maybe people have a knee-jerk reaction to that.
Right.
It's not really at the same time stream of consciousness. It's like a bunch of different threads of thought that are going on. I know that. Do you mean stream of consciousness, Trevor? Yes, but it's like, I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to get at? How to distinguish it between something like, Finnegan's Wake, which comes up. Right. Or James Joyce, which comes up, or Bernhard, who comes up, or Krishnahorkai, who comes up in this book. I mean, it's hard to think of an author who's practiced this kind of, almost impenetrable wall of text that Cárdenas does not mention in this book. But I still feel like he's doing something different. And clearly I have not figured out a way to articulate that.
I don't know if I'll be able to do any better, but no, I mean, I think you put it very well. And in my notes, I'd even mentioned, of course, stream of consciousness, but there's a fairly minimal amount of punctuation, but it's not, like you said, one big long sentence or anything like that. It's more the way I've looked at it. It's funny that it's called aphasia, because aphasia means loss of speech. And I feel like that's a good insight into the author, poking some fun at this, because the narrator himself, his name is Antonio, And much of it takes place in his head, and it is him. It's like he's so excited, or he's just sharing all of his thoughts in this big flow. But as he's sharing, it'll shift and it'll go into somebody else's perspective, sometimes in the middle of a sentence or paragraph. But then other times there'll be entire chapters that skip out of his head and move into other people's heads. So, like you said, it is a different feeling than some of these other authors that you've mentioned. But there are big swaths of kind of what I think it is stream of consciousness. I think that's the best way to describe it. But at the same time, it's really compelling, and most of it is pretty easy to read. There are those challenging sections, but it carries you along in a very Bernhardian way, I would say, or almost like a valser. How once you like, I keep using this comparison, but like jumping in that river, and it kind of, if you just relax and let it take you, eventually you'll end up somewhere where you can get your footing. I mean, I think that's definitely it. Should we touch a little bit just on Antonio himself?
Yeah, for sure. Because part of the fun of this book was he kind of sees himself as various people.
Yeah.
And as various phases of life. Like, this is Antonio 1, who liked this and that and the other. This is Antonio 2, Antonio 5. And you kind of get to know these various Antonios, just like he's talking through them. And so I think we absolutely should maybe illuminate just a little bit about who he is and some of the things he's dealing with as his current Antonio.
Yeah, absolutely. So, he's from Colombia, but now living in the U.S. He lives in Los Angeles, and he shares custody of his 2 children with his ex-wife. And so that's one of the big things in his life that consumes him, this idea of fatherhood and how to be a good father. And he mentions, that he did not have a great upbringing, and so he doesn't really have a good model for parenthood. And so there are times where he's talking about how he'll get ideas on how to be a parent from watching movies and things like that. So he's striving. He's very much imperfect, but you can tell that he really is consumed with the idea of being a good father and, trying to give his kids something that he didn't have. And he's not always perfect at that by any means. So that's one of the big stresses in his life. But another one, we come to learn pretty early on that his sister is mentally unwell, and she has a lot of delusional thoughts. For example, she believes she's being wiretapped by Barack Obama in a conspiracy with her family. And so this is one of those things that continues as he's trying to work his way through his life. He keeps trying to distract himself with different things, his writing, or he's part of this online dating service where he's trying to, find ways to kind of distract him from these troubles that are going on in his life. But I thought his sister was one of the most fascinating characters in this whole thing. There's actually a passage, if you wouldn't mind, I'll try to read and I'm going to dip in and out, and I'm going to try to find a good place to stop. But like we said, with this style, I may just end in the middle, but it'll give you a good idea of what this book is like. So it says, when his sister came to see him in Los Angeles one last time, months before she was arrested for allegedly threatening to shoot her neighbors, she brought along photocopies of a military article explaining advanced techniques in mind control, handing them to him and asking for his help. I promised her I would read them, Antonio writes, but I never did, although I remember the diagrams of spy aircraft like geometry assignments. But instead of helping her, what could he have possibly done to help her? He sobbed in front of her, which didn't help because she stopped telling him anything. I don't want to make you cry, Tonito, Antonio's sister said. And in her dark living room in Baltimore, as she grew more comfortable with the possibility, he was in fact her brother, her everything became a rant that, because of its length and recursiveness, reminded him of Correction by Thomas Bernhard. I know how to appear sane, she said, even if you call the police. I know how to appear sane and calm and reasonable. Yes, officer. No, officer. That doesn't sound like an adequate explanation of quantum mechanics, officer. Laugh. Tonio, that was a joke. So that was just, like I said, I could keep going because once you start reading, he's a really good writer. But maybe that gives you an idea of the way that it kind of intersperses some of these little asides right into that stream. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I don't know how organized my thoughts are going to be here, but I really thought she was a fascinating character, and their relationship over the course of the book goes through so many different changes as he looks back at their past. You deal with kind of where they are presently, and then as you move forward in the book, some things start to change as well.
Yeah, this is definitely a book that I think would serve well another close reading even,
Mm-hmm.
because the first time through is trying to make connections. But that's kind of what Antonio is doing too with his own life. He's a data analyst, and so you get the sense that he has a spreadsheet where he has plotted who he has been
Yeah.
and is connecting things. I have the list here of a few of them. Antonio 7 is the father of Ada and Eva. That's where I kind of get the Finnegan's Wake
Yeah,
reference
that's true. I didn't make
to
that
an
connection.
extent. Antonio 4 is the intellectual. Antonio 2, Ivy League. Antonio 3, bodybuilder. Antonio 7, old man soccer. Antonio 8, the writer. Antonio 1, young man soccer. Antonio 5, database analyst. And he tabulates the other Antonios, linking Antonio 7 and Antonio 1 with a curved double arrow connector. It can get a little bit technical. There's even a part where I'm like, this is really fun to read, but what the heck is he saying? I don't even know.
Yeah.
In other words, if discontinuity indicator equals 0, then soccer, and then it has the greater than, less than, science fiction. But unfortunately for the discontinuity indicator to ever equal 0, he would have to have been a different Antonio. It's just, it can get into these various modes. This is where Ulysses almost comes up, like, where you might have it almost feel like a newspaper or,
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Yeah.
But I really liked the sisters thread and the way that you sense that this is him trying to make sense of old trauma, both for her and for him, as well as his current situation in life. And says his sister understanding her life. I
Yeah.
really liked that part. And then realizing that a lot of the books he is referencing here that we both really like, he calls them the fictions of ununderstanding.
Mm.
Like you've got The Unconsoled by Kazuo Ishiguro, that he brings up. He references a lot of these in chapter titles, or in the names he chooses for himself, because a lot of them are when Antonio the Ninth was Antonio the First. But it's not just that. It's when Antonio was a database analyst. When Antonio was Arturo. And you
Mm-hmm.
don't know what it's going to be about until you start to read that chapter. When
Yeah.
Antonio was at Arturo turns out to be his username on this site, where he can pick up women
Mm-hmm.
whose safe words are Krasnohorkai or something like that. I mean,
Right.
it's really weird, and you can tell this is someone who has a lot going on in their mind, and it's convoluted and such. But the thing that I love about it is Cárdenas is doing all of this, but at the center of this novel is real humanity and real heart.
Mm.
There's even a part where I can't remember exactly how he puts it, but something like, how do we remain awake to the misfortunes of the world without sinking ourselves?
Mm.
A lot of these Antonio, who he is, and Antonio when he was Arturo, these turn out to almost feel like coping mechanisms or ways of getting away from who he was.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoyed that. And then he's got all of these various books and authors. He goes to the translation series at Skylight Books. I mean, how many of this is pretty familiar to us just in the world that we follow on Twitter and
Right.
in our online world. I'm like, I feel like I'm reading about one of my friends here.
I know. Absolutely. No, you mentioned that part about him kind of finding ways to cope. I was reading the Kirkus review, and it says, confronted with discomfort, Antonio's brain activates its emergency erasure mechanisms. And I really liked that. It was this idea of something that we all do to some degree, I think, throughout life. You have to find these ways to cope with just the volume of information and responsibility. And, as you're reading the news or as different stresses come into your life, everybody has their ways to kind of cope with that. And like we mentioned with him, it's maybe different, is very different than you or I would have. But I really liked that. And it kind of did remind me of, like Mrs. Dalloway or some of those things where even though she's dealing with the stresses of life, you get this little glimpse into some of the different ways that she's, dealing with that. And you mentioned, that the humanity that's in this book. And I think I was expecting it to maybe be more cynical than it actually is. But throughout the whole book, I mean, I mentioned him trying to be a good father and forming a relationship with his ex-wife where they're still trying to make this work for their daughters. And then even with the different women that he's picking up through this site, it could have been done very differently. But one of the things I really thought was fascinating was each one of those women get their section of this book, and you find out that like this one plays in the symphony and he goes and watches her play in the symphony, and it starts to like touch on her as a person. Or another lady that he dated, it follows her as she tries to get back a dog that was stolen by an ex-boyfriend. And it takes this time to actually delve into the humanity of each of the characters, which when I started the book, I don't know that I anticipated it to go in that direction. And even with his sister, I thought for much of the book that it might go in some different directions than it actually did. But there are some really soft and kind moments between them that are mixed in with a lot of the addressing the mental illness and some of the conspiracy theories and all that stuff, but they continue to connect, whether in the past or even in the present, in ways that are actually pretty touching. So I don't know. It's a really interesting book.
Mm-hmm. There's a really good review in the Northwest Review that what you're touching on there, I think really goes into it really well. It's about these relationships he has with these women. Says Antonio probes them into divulging their personal histories. A lot of them have chapter titles, and it's about them in a way. Many are immigrants themselves, much like a psychiatrist or an oral historian. That's kind of his role in a way. In so doing, he comes off as a cross between a Lothario and a hopeless romantic. He's drawn to these women less out of sexual compulsion than out of a desire to disappear into their lives in the same way that he disappears into books or movies. Regardless, one still gets the sense that he's using them. And then here's the thing that I think is so interesting, and I like that this articulates it so well. Likewise, Antonio feels like an interloper among the members of his family. He reflects at one point on this family of his, which amazingly still includes him, as if he can't quite believe that they keep allowing him to come around. Cárdenas's deft characterization of Antonio's confused, troubled masculinity is one of the novel's most impressive achievements. And I agree, it doesn't come off like it's not self-pitying or even author-pitying. It's, this is one of the pitfalls of all these great white male authors of the 20th century in America, is you get the sense you're supposed to feel sorry for some of these troubled, white men who they write about. And that's not how I feel here. I mean, I know this is not written by one of them, and it's not about one of their subjects either, but he is an intellectual in a way, and he is someone who is going online to meet, these younger women. And so it could come off as very lurid, but it's there.
Right.
But it's acknowledged as such. It's not meant to be sympathetic or here, you got to understand his troubles. You get that, but I don't know. I think it's just really well done.
No, I do too. There was one more passage that kind of ties in that I was just going to read if you don't mind. It's Antonio talking to an ex-girlfriend, and it says, "If I've learned anything about breakups," Antonio said, "and I haven't really learned anything about breakups." And here she interrupted him and said, "Why do you always qualify yourself like that?" And he said, "Because I believe this business of learning is a mirage we impose on ourselves to feel better about our fated lives." "Does that include what I just said about changing?" Dora said. "That wasn't my intention, but yes," Antonio said, reaching across the table to rest his hand on her forearm, wanting her to believe he could believe she could change. "Why shouldn't we nurse our delusions," Antonio said, "if we find consolation in them?" And that's just an example. Like, I don't know. He's so good at like all this other stuff. Like you said, there's these formulas and he's doing this data analysis and all these other things, but then there's these really human moments, just these insights that he just drops in right in the middle of this big paragraph. And you're just like, wow, some of them just take you.
Glad I didn't miss that, I was reading through all the other cataloging of things.
Exactly. Like what you said about rereading, I think is absolutely something that I'm going to do. And I even started last night because it had been a couple weeks since I'd read this and I wanted to make sure that I could, try to talk about it intelligently, or try to at least. And even rereading it, I was already getting huge insights that I missed the first time. So I absolutely think this is one that would benefit from a reread. But yeah, it's so good.
And from a lot of other side projects, he references a ton of books and a ton of movies.
He does.
In this. And he talks about them as if you know what he's talking about. Fortunately, I think both of us do know a lot because, again, of the circles we've run around in We've
Mm-hmm.
come across these, and even the Criterion collection, you can get a lot of these movies that are there
Yeah.
by just being part of that community and watching, what they're putting out. So I did love that, but I can also see it being quite intimidating, or maybe even having the ability to lose someone who's just coming to it and doesn't maybe have all of those references. And he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really hold your hand, even if you do know what they are. He may bring up a movie on page 2 and then slip into it without mentioning it, the plot of it 10 pages later. And it's only because you may know the movie that you realize that's what he's doing. He is making his life, he is interpreting his life through the lens of that film.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. It's not, and Cárdenas is not holding your hand. He's not
No.
telling you that's what's going on. It's just, you got to pick up on it. And I'm sure
Absolutely.
I missed a ton.
No, I feel the same way. And like I said, even when I was rereading it, I was already picking up on some things that I had missed the first time. So yeah, I think I could see myself actually rereading this one fairly soon, because it's one of those, we were talking about, like an earworm feeling book. This is definitely one of those that already, even in the 2 or 3 weeks
Mm-hmm.
since I've read it, I find myself thinking about a lot. He has a debut novel. This is his second novel. His debut novel is called The Revolutionaries Try Again. And I've heard people speak of that one very highly too. So I don't know. Would you ever be interested in checking that one out, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I would be. I was just going to say, though, I didn't necessarily enjoy reading
No.
this one.
Yeah.
It's one that I think gets its life as you reflect on it. Like, if I were just walking around and reading this book, I probably wouldn't give it, like, right as I'm reading it, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is not, it's a lot of, it wasn't just like a lot of work. It just, the pleasure factor, I think, is more in making the connections, having your brain kind of working after the fact and having these conversations like we're having. If I
Absolutely.
just read it and then tried to rate it, I'm not sure if I would have, what I'd give it. That kind of shows
No.
how silly that process is right there.
Right. No, it's true. I mean, that's what we do so often, is give this initial star rating right after we finish a book. And like you said, for this one, I feel the same way. And that's probably where some of my little bit of nervousness was coming from as I was reading it, because I don't know what I would have given it right after. But like you just said, as you sit there and reflect on it, and I don't know if you find sometimes when you're looking back at your list of books you've read over the course of a year, and you see something you gave a 3 stars, and you're like, whoa, like if I was thinking of it now, I might have given it 4 or 5. So it's
Yeah.
always interesting how time can kind of change those initial thoughts that you have about a book. And this one, I could see it changing multiple times, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but yeah, the Revolutionaries Try Again. I don't know much about that one, but as I was reading this one and trying to read up on it, saw that referenced and thought,
Mm-hmm.
this is definitely someone worth watching and getting to know all of his work.
Absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on this, but I believe I'd seen somewhere that this Aphasia might be the first book in I don't know if it's a loose series,
Oh,
or I think there might be some follow-ups, but again, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure that's what I'd read. So if so, I would be curious to kind of, I don't know if you'd be back with Antonio, or exactly what the connections would be, but if nothing else, I'm very curious to see where he goes next.
well, I'll tell you what, this says a lot, I think. When you said that, I thought, oh, good. I hope
Yeah.
so. Whether you're
Good.
telling me the truth or not,
Mm-hmm.
just that you say that and I'm excited by that prospect, that kind of tells me where my heart is with this
Yeah.
book. Yeah, good. Good.
Absolutely. Well, if anybody out there did read along or has read it, I would love to hear their thoughts, because this is one I feel like you could talk about with a lot of people for a long time and never
Hmm.
come to any specific conclusions, but it's just a fun book to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's go on to the other one,
Yeah.
Ennemonde by Giono, translated by Bill Johnston, who translated one of my favorite books of all time, Stone Upon Stone by Wisław Myśliwski. So Bill Johnston, talk about having some skills. That's Polish. This
Right.
was French. And the thing is, I kind of feel like the voice in Ennemonde, the kind of almost bitter, like frustrated voice,
Mm-hmm.
is the same. It kind of took me back to Stone Upon Stone in a way. So maybe that's just Bill Johnston. Maybe these books are not at all this way. He just has that kind of, I'm just kidding. I
Right.
think he just has a facility with getting that kind of voice in there. And
Yeah.
I've read
Oh,
other Gionos and it has felt very much like them too. But I would say for the first 30, 40 pages of this very short book, I thought, oh, we're on solid ground. I just finished Aphasia, which I'm like,
mm-hmm.
I have no idea what to even think right now. And I'm reading this one thinking, oh, this is just a straightforward, here we're talking about a place
Right.
in Provence, France, which he's famous for kind of bringing to life in his books. And then all of a sudden, it is all over the place. I've lost the thread. I'm not with Ennemonde, who is a female character in the book. I say that because I wouldn't have known, Ennemonde to me is just a word, not a name, or with any kind of associations. But she's the central female character of this book. And then there's a part 2. And she's not even in that part.
She disappears for what, 60, 70 pages out of
Oh, yeah. Even in part
book?
1, she's gone. And then in part 2, it's not even about the same people at all. And I am sitting there thinking, oh my word, what is this book? But the thing is, that's how he is in all of his books to me. I start like Melville, for example. What a weird book that you feel like you have the thread of, and then all of a sudden, poof, it's gone. That's how I felt with Ennemonde. But give me some of your initial thoughts of this one.
Very similar to yours. I was having the same thoughts. Like, okay, now as I started to settle in, it was like, okay, I know where I'm going with this. After Aphasia, this might be more of a straightforward, and framing it with our conversation upcoming, I'm like, okay, this will be a good one to talk about. I can make sense of it. And then all of a sudden, I had very different thoughts all of a sudden. But it's very interesting. I was reading a little bit about the history, and it sounds like it was kind of published with a lot more notes in some editions where it made it a little more clear that these are kind of separate pieces.
Yes.
And it's interesting that Archipelago chose, and I looking back, I kind of like it, that they didn't necessarily, speaking of not holding your hand, they just kind of dropped it in there. And it's very interesting. It wrong-footed me for sure, but it's just like Aphasia. When I got to the end of the book and looking back on it, I really like that they did it that way. And you can see the themes that are there that you don't need to be told what they are. You need to find them yourself.
Well, and to be honest, they may have even cut one of the handholds that was in the original, because it wasn't just Ennemonde. It was Ennemonde and other characters. Yeah. Just that little part would have been helpful to know that it's okay that I'm leaving her. It's not all about her. It's about her and this place, which it very much is. I mean, this is a place novella. Dual thing. I don't even know how they connect in many ways, because they also connect to Giono's other fiction like Hill, or this just seems to fit with a bigger project for me of going through this region and some of the uniqueness, I guess I'll put it that way, of the people. And I did really, really like how often he would kind of wax lyrical about the places, but also about some of the philosophies. Like there's this part that maybe isn't unique to this particular region, but it says the tool that people around here have most often in their hand is a shotgun, whether it's for hunting or for, let's say, philosophical reflection. In either case, there's no solution without a shot being fired. The gun hangs from the stem of a wine glass that's been embedded in the wall near the chair where the man of the house sits. Whether this chair is at the table or by the fireplace, the shotgun is always within arm's reach. It's not that the region is unsafe because of a lack of police. On the contrary, even in the heyday of banditry, there was never any crime up here, except for one incident in 1928, and that one was precisely about what everyone is afraid of. Everyone is afraid of loneliness. Families are no solution. At most, they're collections of lonesome people who in reality are each heading in their own direction. Families don't come together around someone. They separate as they move away from someone. Then there's metaphysics, and not the Sorbonne kind, rather the sort you have to bear in mind in confronting irredeemable solitude in the outside world. Monsieur Sartre would not be of much use here. A shotgun, on the other hand, comes in handy in many situations. I mean, it's about this place, and Ennemonde is an interesting character in it. You follow her life. I mean, you go through most of her life, and she herself turns out as a bit of a criminal. But I just found these sections about the place and the loneliness of the place and the isolation to be what really pulled me through. And I was delighted that the last section, the second part,
Mm-hmm.
was almost strictly about place in the Camargue region there. And did you read Maliqua, the Henri Bosco book that
I
NYRB
did.
put out? Did this, like, that region
Oh yeah.
is, I've never been there. I'd never even really heard of it. And now it's like, do I dare go there someday? It sounds like it might
Right.
eat my soul.
I know. No, absolutely. It's amazing how he walks that line of it's this gorgeous nature writing or talking about these descriptions of the sun coming up. But then just when you're feeling like it's this beautiful, wonderful place, like he does not pull any punches about both the people who inhabit it and how cutthroat they are, and they're just trying to survive. And then he ties that nicely into the animals and the other creatures who are out there. And it's just very much nature, claw and tooth, just everybody's out there trying to survive and doing whatever it takes. Like you mentioned with Ennemonde, like she's a very, you look up to her in many ways because she's made it work. But at the same time, she's making it work by some nefarious means when necessary. And she's not the only one. So it's definitely a survival of the fittest type of environment. I mean, much of the second section that you mentioned is all about nature. There's not even that many mentions of humans. There's one excerpt that I was going to read from there, that part that I thought was just wonderful. It says, "Now, along with the daylight, the secretary bird enters the stage. He comes in with rapid steps. That's why he's also called the messenger bird. He has his quill tucked behind his ear like a bookkeeper, which is where he gets his name. In order to walk even faster, he uses not his wings, but his ferocity, which he hardens like a lead sinker in his forward-leaning head. In this manner, he drives himself onward like a Greek hero. He paces the sands like Achilles circling Troy. He's a walking vulture, destined to live in deserts. His life is pure Iliad. He has greaves on his shins. He's gray as an ancient warrior, except on his flanks, where, like old trophies of plunder, he wears emerald, sapphire, and tarnished gold. For a long time now, he's been on the lookout for snakes, watching for the largest of them. He was waiting for the sun. The sun is here. He waits no longer. He attacks." It's just like, wow. I mean, that to me is just wonderful, wonderful writing. And a huge chunk of the second half of the book is scenes like that, where it's focusing on a specific animal, a specific region of this region, and so it'll kind of move around and just throughout that whole part, there was just some absolutely wonderful nature writing. But like we said, it's not nostalgic or, the birds are tweeting in the trees. It's all about the reality of nature. And that's what I meant about not knowing what it was all about as I was reading, but then looking back at the tie-ins between some of those scenes and the way that some of these people are surviving. It's very much humans as another animal in this tough world, just trying to make do.
And I like to, like you put it really well, just this, he's got this nature and it seems beautiful, but if you look closer, he's showing you how horrific, and not just on a, it's dangerous level, but this screw up your mind kind of thing. And I really like, this is the beginning of part 2. It says, "When mysteries are very crafty, they hide in the light. Shadows are merely a decoy." And that's kind of how I feel about his book here. He's got these beautiful passages about the nature. And then you read a section like this about the people dealing with this region. "It will all end well. Hatred, suspicion, jealousy are regional products. Unwilling to waste time on love, people polish up the other passions. It's not that these folks are worse than others. It's that, individualists to an extreme and incurably solitary, they're constantly afraid of being duped. And if love does that often, makes you a dupe, hatred never does. There you're on solid ground. I love you. Well, that's never sure. Proof is needed. I hate you. That's solid as gold bullion."
Yeah.
And I don't know, the whole book then, we're not talking about a lot of the characters, even Ennemonde herself, but there are many characters in this that are kind of working through this world, and some of them die and some of them disappear, and it's weird. But I really like another part, just to kind of sum up a theme. This realist approach at first glance seems at odds with the fact that they inhabit a land where life can only sustain itself with a constant supply of unreality, as we shall see. But reality pushed to an extreme meets back up again with unreality. To face things full on is to accept their magic. In any case, not to argue with it. I'll be honest, that part there reminds me of The Haunting of Hill House, the beginning.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, you got a dream, and no one lives in a purely sane world. And just this thing of, these people have this, but they have their minds, and their minds are going to keep working in here. That's where the hatred and the love come in, and the schemes and the kind of, I don't know. I thought this book was fantastic as well in a very strange way.
Very strange. And we talked a lot about how there's like the harsh reality of all this, and it's not sugarcoating anything, but also it does take on some kind of mythical descriptions and feelings at times as well. And it kind of reminds me of like the Old West in the US, or for example, where there's kind of these tales and these legends and these myths that kind of form. And there's one quick description of Ennemonde herself that I was just going to read that I think is really good. And it kind of has that mythical feel. Like when that section I read earlier, they were talking about the Iliad, this has kind of that feel to it for me. So it says, as for her body, thanks to multiple pregnancies, it had come to resemble the bodies of the women of the high country. It bore only the most distant relation to the human form. Her face was agreeable, despite the loss of all her teeth. Her lips were full enough to remain in bloom. She had an attractive, fresh, pink complexion. Her brown eyes were extremely pure, without wrinkles or dark shadows, and were lined with long, curving lashes. She weighed over 280 pounds, but she moved with amazing agility. Men joked about the size of her thighs, without ever having seen them, of course. Despite her weight and her large limbs, she was easily capable of covering 12 miles on foot in 5 hours on difficult paths. She had milk-white skin, having always protected it from the sun under a hat, long sleeves, and high collars, like all men and women who know what the sun really is. She wasn't a woman who could be quickly explained. There was all this monstrousness, and the look in those lovely eyes. That gaze led them to be cautious, not because it was hostile, but quite the opposite. I just, like, what a great description. And it's just like, it has like these, not godlike, but it's just, I don't know, it does have that kind of mythical feel to it, to me a little bit. And it's just these legends that are walking around these, but then that's balanced by the fact that it's very much, like I said, a hyper real book in a lot of ways too. It's just fascinating.
It is, because as you're saying, and you and I went to the same spot as you were saying it. You led me well. You led me well, I guess I should say. Because it's like, oh yeah, this sounds mythical and so familiar to the world we live in right now. Right. People we encounter and meet with. It's fascinating. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like Giono's work, and I'm glad I've got a few more on the shelf that I haven't read yet, and I hope that keeps coming, because it seems that NYRB and Archipelago are putting out a few of his things fairly regularly. I hope there's more on the way.
I do too. I've read this one now and Melville, and I still have a few more. Like you said, The Open Road, which just came out recently, A King Alone, and Hill. King Alone. All three of those other ones are from NYRB. So
and Occupation Journal is also out recently from Archipelago. Mm-hmm. I haven't read that one, and I haven't read A King Alone, but I loved Hill. I think that one appeals to me. Really love Hill. You will probably love all of them to one degree or another, but Hill was. It's kind of like this one. It's about the place, and it's a little bit. You feel like you're entering one world because it feels like other books you've read, and then all of a sudden it's something else.
Well, I know our friend Frances is a huge Giono fan, so I'm sure she would have recommendations for us and for anybody else on where to go next. But it kind of does seem like with him, you can't really go wrong, and everyone will be something that will be a work that you'll get something out of.
Yeah. Well, Paul, it's nice. I'm glad we talk about these things. It is crazy how much more I get out of them when we do this. It's really, really pleasant, and I hope it helps others too. But I guess if not, they could have turned the episode off, a half hour ago.
That's right. They might have, but I just enjoyed talking to you about it anyway. And like you said, I was a little nervous about there's plenty to talk about, but how to form some coherent thoughts from these books. And as always, when I talk to you, it just comes naturally. So
something's coming up. Yeah. And I've appreciated your insights. They've enriched my readings.
Yeah, me too.
Well, in closing, listeners, please remember the Summer Book Club voting over on Twitter. And I hope you join us. I really do. I think that'll be a lot of fun. Even if there's just one of you who joins, that'll be fun. And I guess if it's just Paul and me, we just had a good time talking about books that I don't know if anyone else read or joined us on. And that was great. Right. But we do think it would be a lot of fun. And then also the newsletter. Sign up for the newsletter if you're interested, because again, that's probably where a lot of our show notes and just kind of thoughts on what's coming up and what we've been doing. We're not going to make them long, and we're going to put them out with the episodes. It's not like you're going to get a newsletter from us every day. We're not trying to inundate you. No. But I think that might be a nice thing to sign up for, and look forward to seeing you wherever we see you, though, listeners. And Paul, you too. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mookse and the Gripes podcast. You can follow the Mookse and the Gripes and get show notes and book and film reviews at mookseandgripes.com. On Twitter, you can follow Trevor at Mookse and Paul at BiblioPaul. You can also get information about future shows on our Patreon. If you'd like to donate to the show, anything and everything, even $1 a month helps and is deeply appreciated. You can become a Patreon at patreon.com/mooks. Until next time,